Ken West. Just some of the general reasons a CMS is a good thing for an organization. It might seem really repetitive and boring and stuff you already know if you're a plone developer and you do this every day, but to organizations that might be investigating plone or other CMS tools, these might be of interest. And then I'm going to go into a little bit more of the things that might be a little more foreign to some government departments as far as open source. And then also pay attention to some of the things that I've come across in projects that seem to be important to all clients, but maybe a little more emphasis is given to them when you're dealing with public sector type websites for government agencies. And then also address why plone would be a good fit and do a little comparison of plone versus some other tools. So just some of the general things you get out of a content management system. Usually you've got people in department areas that want to update content on their own, and they don't have technical programming type skills. They want to have it be as easy as using, sorry to quote Microsoft, but a Microsoft Word through a web browser. That's always the statement. It has to be as easy as that. That's what they're used to using. And obviously, plone is, and many CMSs can handle that capability. Standardizing their internal workflows, that's something that for a small two-person web team isn't as big of a deal, but for government agencies that have a lot of approval processes and workflows, that's a key element. On the flip side, while empowering users to manage content on their own, we're also freeing up IT people to work on important things instead of updating a web page. So another thing that a good CMS should come with would be an audit trail and versioning, and those were things that you used to have to go out there and download and figure out which products to add on to plone to get those capabilities, and now over the last year or so those have become part of the core of plone. Another key thing when you are dealing with multiple departments that are approving content through a workflow is you want to make sure that the right users can edit things and other people can't. And you want to be able to make sure that the approvers can approve and maybe they can or can't modify content. Plone does that really well. Other, especially large commercial tools, do it well. On the open source side, there maybe isn't as much attention given to that as you see in plone, in my opinion. Then the idea of managing content once and reusing content. I kind of make the comparison for developer crowds, for years and years, developers talk about reuse of code, writing it once, using it many places, making it, componentizing things so that they're more easily reused. And that's what a CMS allows you to do with content. Searchability and management of metadata, making sure that Google and Yahoo can find your web content, that users, visitors to your site can find your content easily. And then scheduling or publishing of expiration of content automatically. This is one of those things that has been available in plone since pre-1.0 that still when clients see it, they just go, wow. I can set up something to show up on my website 9 o'clock a week from now and to be pulled off of it automatically the end of that day. It's something that a good CMS should just automatically have built in, but it's one of those things that you forget plone's had forever. And there's a lot of those things that really impress and are really useful. And then again, another reason you would want a CMS is to take the design aspect out of your end users and enforce your consistent look and feel from every page to page to page, allowing them to just use some pre-selected CSS styles. Advantages of open source. So a lot of I guess, a number of years ago, open source might have been a lot more difficult to even talk about bringing into a government agency or, Fortune 500 or whatever type corporate environments. It was really more looked at, at first for organizations that, the budget was the primary constraint. And now, it's much more widely accepted, whether it be because of Linux or Firefox or whatever. Open source products are being used everywhere, and that's government's no exception. Now, one thing I do want to point out is, while plone being open source is an advantage in terms of the CMS and your published content can be made to do whatever you want. On the flip side, I think an integrator needs to help guide the the client and not make it seem as though Plone is their software product and kind of present it as, this is another CMS and I'm an integrator, I'm implementing it for you, I'm doing customizations around that core functionality, but I guess as early on as possible, if integrators, consultants, can start to get that idea across that there's, it's a community-driven tool, I think that makes it easier on the integrator and the client later, because as they get working with the tool and learn that, hey, the fact that it's a community-driven software project can be a major advantage for us. We can use that to our advantage instead of looking at it as a vendor that we can beat over the head when something's not working. We can, through that vendor maybe that we work with, try to get a sprint going or something that would build out or enhance, the certain pieces of functionality that we're looking for that Plone maybe doesn't come with yet. And I think, one complaint that you'll hear with Plone is that, it's hard to find integrators. Well, I'm going to cancel here real quick and go to the web. We do have a plone.net site where there's hundreds of integrators listed, and you can search by country or, by type of focus, whether it's government or nonprofit or whatever. And I think that if you compared it to commercial CMS type vendors, there's as many, if not more, vendors, integrators around to tap into. I think a lot of people kind of confuse Plone with a programming language. They look at the availability of Plone developers and compare that to PHP or Java or .NET developers, and it's really apples and oranges. I mean, it should be more of a comparison of Plone, the CMS, to how many vignette developers can I find? How many interwoven developers can I find? They're all full application stack that have their own learning curve, and you need an expert for that stack, not just the raw programming language, obviously. But a lot of people make that comparison of, oh, I can find a PHP developer easily. Well, great. Do they know a CMS? And then another advantage of open source, obviously, is that not just that you have access to the code to improve it, but also to assess it. For some government agencies, it's really key to do a complete security assessment of code rather than just trusting that the vendor's code, doesn't have, flaws. So instead of, whoop, I'm falling asleep there. Instead of, security by obscurity, we actually have security due to having thousands of eyeballs on the code. And Plone in particular has very few security patches that get released in a given year versus a number of other systems, open source or commercial. Why is this thing falling asleep? One other key advantage of using open source CMS-based tools would be, if you think about your Web 2.0 features, it's the open source tools that always have them first, whether it's Ajax, dragging and dropping things, RSS, wiki, forums, blogs, all those things made their way through open source products. Then there became wide adoption and people using it in their free time and deciding that whether it's their corporate environment or government agency or whatever, that those it'd be useful to have a wiki. It'd be useful to have a forum. So I think that's another major advantage of open source, that you're going to get those goodies before everybody else. And I didn't really address this. Besides there being many integrators, Plone has been, the interface itself of the CMS has been internationalized. If you were to change your default language on your browser to Portuguese or French or Spanish or Lithuanian, whatever, the interface itself, your submit button, your edit tabs, all those things automatically, convert to that language on the fly. In addition to that, you're still responsible for maintaining different versions, translations of your content, and Plone has built-in functionality to help with that. So these should be things that are important to any organization, I guess. But again, these were the things that kind of struck me as the hot items that come up with working with government clients. You know, whether it's a corporate site or whatever organization, everybody wants their site to be W3C or various types of compliance standards, and a lot of people make some kind of effort to do that, or organizations do. But with government agencies, at least in the States, and I know there's different guidelines maybe for Europe, but it's more of a mandate. You have to make your site compliant so that's more accessible for people that have sight disabilities and other things. So that's something that is a make it or break it requirement for CMS and plone. As some of you know, a lot of people start with the built-in plone site theme. That's already got hundreds and hundreds of hours baked into it to make sure it's accessible, from being able to increase the font size on the page very easily by clicking on a bigger letter A, or from when you upload an image, being prompted to add a title and that becoming your alt text for your image when it's inserted on a page. All of the things that are key to compliance standards. So the organizations that start with that can have a jump start already. If you're having your design team just drum up whatever they want, obviously you'd have your own work to do to make sure that your custom design is accessible. But the CMS interface itself is very compliance standard, and if you extend from there, you're already getting a lot of that. Again, I mentioned the Microsoft Word in a browser. I hear that every time. The open source license, I guess, I've been pleasantly surprised that it hasn't been as big an issue as I thought it would be. Government agencies have already been adopting open source tools for a while now. They've already gone through and had people look over the GPL or the Apache license and the various open source licenses. So it's not as much of a problem as it might have been in 8 years ago. Everybody wants to be able to customize their CMS, but I find that government agencies, that's a real attraction for plone or for an open source CMS, is that a commercial tool, if it doesn't do exactly what they need, I mean that's a big frustration, and I guess it is for every client, but there's a huge attraction for government agencies to actually have something that can be completely customized, whether it's the user interface or the resulting site, but mostly it's that user interface, the workflows, the content types, all of that really being customized without limitation because it's open source. And then versioning and audit trail. With government agencies, you have accountability in theory, and so they really have more of an audit trail and versioning type requirement that a lot of other organizations, it would be overkill for. Again, like a 2 or 3 person web team that's just putting updates on their brochureware site or something, maybe not as big a deal, but for a government agency, that's a huge deal. Went over that already: workflow and permissions, security, people being able to do what they should be able to do with their user role and that kind of thing, but also with security. One other thing that's nice about plone is that it can be used in a way that the CMS itself is completely behind a firewall, that your public visitors are not actually hitting a dynamic application. You can, there's an add-on tool called CMF deployment. There's other ways to pump out all of your content as a static HTML site. That allows for you to put your entire public site on a zip drive and walk it across the hall to something that's maybe not networked with your same internal servers. And so that's not something that's completely unique to plone, but there's a number of tools that would have a harder time doing that. So in terms of security, as far as people breaching your server and getting into the database and that kind of thing, a plone site can become a completely static site. So that kind of cuts everything off at the pass in terms of getting to data, changing data. And cost, of course, it's going to be important to every type of organization. But I've been, again, pleasantly surprised to see that the public sector folks that I've worked with are very cost conscious, and plone plays very well when it's compared to whether it's commercial tools or other open source tools, because by the time they look at the 5% whatever functionality that some of the commercial tools might have that they might or might not use, and then they compare the price of starting off at $250,000 for the most bare bones implementation of some of these commercial tools, it's pretty easy to move plone up on the list. And then on support, I've done a lot of times clients, whether it's government or not, will do multiple prototypes or proofs of concept where maybe we'll do a short little exercise to prove plone can be used to manage this one little section of their site, and someone else will do it in another tool. And maybe well, I mean, this has exactly happened, that they've had their own internal Java developer that's very proficient with, say, BEA or something, and they're waiting 3 days to get a response from support, and they're a paying customer. They pay thousands per year for support. Whereas I don't have a live connection here right now. But if you go to the documentation tab, or I'm sorry, the support tab on plone.org, and you click this little button, you don't even have to have your own IRC chat client installed. You'll immediately see the 150 plus plone developers or users that are online 24/7, asking questions, getting answers. It's a good way to get support. It's a good way to find out what people are moving to in terms of some new add-on product is going to be the way that you're going to want to do your dynamic forms on your site, or whatever the answer is. But I mean, that's invaluable. If you measure it against the 20% a year of your license cost that you're paying for a commercial tool, and the days you're waiting for response times versus getting a response right now. And then in addition to that, there are mailing lists. There's user mailing lists, developer mailing lists. I just find that the support's been unparalleled to any product I've ever worked with. And to give you a little bit of background, I guess, before I got into focusing on plone implementations and founding a company to just do that, I worked for a bigger IT company in the Midwest called SPR, and we used to do more of the objective third-party evaluation of different tools, whether they were commercial or open source, and help clients select a CMS, build a requirements list, bring in the vendors to do demos, all that kind of thing. And so I have implemented and seen both the commercial and the open source tools, and so when I say that the support in the plone community is better than anything else, I mean, I've seen everything else. I'm not just a plone cheerleader. So in terms of why plone's a good fit, you get all the benefits that we went over in terms of a CMS. The improved efficiencies, the consistent look and feel, the automated scheduling of content publishing, version control, audit trail, all that stuff. You get all the benefits of open source, being able to make it do whatever you want. Transparency, being able to see the code, being able to inspect the code, make sure it's secure and well written. The fact that you've got a vibrant community in terms of plone, where again, it's not that there's 150 plone developers, that's just how many are online right now. There's hundreds and hundreds of developers worldwide, and you've got a release management team that's scoping out what the next 18 months looks like for the release cycle that we just heard Alexander talking about. You've got a foundation. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead to another slide. But you've got a foundation that protects the intellectual property and that makes sure that the strategy from the community side and from the software side is right. And actually, we brought in, he had a picture during his presentation of the Strategic Planning Summit at Google. And we actually had, I don't know of any other open source project that's done this. We brought in an outside third-party evaluator type guy that writes the reports that people buy to compare this tool to that tool, and is about the only one I've seen that has done that for open source tools as well. And Seth Gottlieb. And so we brought him in to get some honest feedback of how do we stack up against Drupal, Joomla, the other ones that are usually on people's top list that they're evaluating. And we actually come out very well, but the key is to not pat ourselves on the back. The key is that we're getting feedback from outside eyes and making Plone. The key thing that we came up with during that session was that, yeah, Plone's great and does a lot of great things, but it needs to be more approachable. And so that's been the main focus over the last year here, being able to configure a site admin, more of a power user, to be able to do more of the customizations through the web by clicking on their own. So again, that's why specifically Plone, I think, is a good fit if you're looking at open source CMS tools. So I have to put a big shout out to Linux for breaking through the FUD barriers, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Again, 10 years ago, trying to introduce open source to any organization would be tough, let alone the public sector. Thanks to Microsoft, IBM, and Oracle for not having a clue on enterprise content management for many years. And in recent years, they've gobbled up other companies. Oracle bought Stellent. IBM's bought 2 or 3. Microsoft bought a company called Encompass Labs around 2000, and then they kind of pushed the product to the side for some reason. I think SharePoint's going to answer everything, I guess. But anyway, thanks to them, thanks to Vignette and Interwoven and Red Dot and many others for being really expensive. Like I said, Red Dot's probably on the most expensive, the least expensive end of that list. And again, you're talking at least $250,000 just to get started with a couple servers, one for your CMS, one for your portal that publishes your live site. Just it's kind of it's either insane to think about the cost of that or how great a value you're getting with Plone or a very good open source product. Because those hours, the same hours have been put into building Plone. Cost, of course, went into not just the software side of the cost, but also support. There's a lot of free support that you can get through Plone that's as expert as paying your local vendor to give you support. So you can try that, and then you can engage some consultant to help if you have to take it further. But the community is usually the first place to go to. And so, like I said in an earlier slide, the sooner that you can kind of get clients to embrace the community aspect of Plone, I mean, they're just helping themselves instead of having this us-them relationship with the vendor like they're used to. They start to embrace the community, then eventually they kind of start to become the community and at least maybe providing use cases and requirements for new features because developers don't always think those up very well. There's a lot of ways for them to get involved and everybody benefits. 80-20 rule, that's kind of the big sell of open source, I think, is instead of starting from scratch and writing something, from scratch on your own and taking however many months or years to do so, instead of starting with commercial with something that you can't customize nearly as much, an open source product already gives you that jump start of doing 80-90% of what you needed to do, and then you either have your own technical team or contractors help you build out the rest of it. It seems like a real good value proposition to me. And I talked a little bit about the foundation and the strategic planning that goes on with the Plone community. And I wouldn't sell that short. There's been a few different open source projects that have had some big problems. The Joomla community split off from the Mambo community because they had some, they wanted to take the Mambo project and make it more corporate again and run it from the company instead of the community. MySQL, obviously got bought by a large IT vendor and started actually charging license fees for depending upon how you're using the product. So the fact that the Plone Foundation is overseeing that and making sure that the intellectual property is maintained and that Plone will always be open is a key aspect that a lot of other open source projects are catching up to try to do. So I've pretty much, I think, addressed that what the key special considerations that I called out were for government agencies. I think those are also things that plone does really well. So workflow capabilities, there's even some commercial tools that don't have the workflow capabilities that plone does. Definitely on the open source side, I think it surpasses about anything I've seen. Fine-grained permission enforcement into individual links that you are presented on a page. If you do a search in a plone site and you're logged in as one user, you get different results than if you were logged in as a different user. The navigation, there's so many elements that are down to a really fine-grained level in terms of access control and permissions. The version control audit trail locking, that was something that, to me, for a few years, plone was severely lacking, and there were people that had that need, and other vendors like Enfold that stitched together some of those, the staging server and the versioning, but it just wasn't all nicely integrated. And now, over the last year or so, plone's had that as part of its core, and I think it really then goes head-to-head with the commercial tools a lot better than it used to for agencies that need that type of functionality. Again, I went over the security aspect of the different ways that you can deploy it to make it even more secure, and that was just one example. But there's also a number of people at the conference I've been talking to who are already, have rolled out client sites on the EC2 cloud. So leveraging a farm of servers that Google or Amazon provides as a cloud, and you're just kind of carving out your virtual slice of that and paying for what you actually use instead of buying a whole dedicated server, paying $400 or $500 a month, and getting 50 hits a day. It's just a lot more economical. So there's many different deployment options that you can take to, and then it's road tested. So there's some open source products in particular, kind of spike like this in terms of interest, and I think the plone curve has been like this, and now it does that typical mature product thing where it starts to go like this. What else are you going to add to it? It's already a very full functional content management system. So I think the things that you see developed now are the things around the edges, like the nice to have Web 2.0 features, like a better blogging tool answer. And there's a presentation today on Vice. It's more the creature features that people might have if they're logging into a dynamic plone-based site, not so much the pushing out publishing model. That's pretty much been answered. I mean, plone does that really well. So some recommendations. One of the things, I guess, in the U.S., the government agencies that are using plone either can't, or some of them can't, really say that they're using plone. But a lot of the biggest ones that you can think of either are or are investigating it. It'd be nice if there would be some way that they could give a clue that they like plone or use plone or something, but it's pretty tough. But if you visit some of them, you might notice the plone logo as their favorite icon. So if any of you are out there and thinking about using plone and you just want to give a little head nod that you're using it, please do. Please keep the favorite icon set to the plone logo. Although I wouldn't think that the foundation would care because it's not for profit, but I don't think they're going to complain if they finally have some government clients that they can kind of point to and say they're using plone. I think in Europe it's a little more open than that, and so I recommend that you go to plonegov.org, and there's more of a consortium effort to try to pre-package some of the add-on tools stack that would be useful for government type of plone-based sites, whether it's for intranet, more of like a SharePoint replacement, or for your public website. Let's see. Some of the things as far as government agencies getting involved with it, even if they can't publicly say we're using plone or we're using this vendor. Some of the things that can be done, though, is if you look at what Google's done, even they've helped sponsor plone conferences, provided meeting space, and there's other ways to help the community, without, I guess, directly say you're either, putting out a press release saying you use plone or anything like that. Although that would be helpful. And one other thing, I guess, is that somehow agencies do talk amongst themselves a little bit, and so once one learns that they're using plone, I guess, talk gets around, word gets around town, and through the grapevine, others find out as they're inspecting what CMS tools they should use, and plone is on the short list of many of those organizations. That's my contact information if anyone wants to follow up. So CTXLKen is my IRC handle if you see me in #plone, and that's my email address. And I'm available afterwards if anyone wants to chat, but I think we've got a few minutes, right, for some questions? Okay, so that's about what I planned. So if there's any questions, yeah, okay.
Yeah, how are you finding sort of SharePoint? Because we're doing quite a lot of work with the NHS in the UK, which is the health service, and they have, they have a site-wide SharePoint license. So it's quite different. The argument is, oh well, we've got SharePoint license.
Right.
They don't realise actually still going to cost them a lot of money for the integrators and so on. Have you come across that?
Right, right. So I guess the Microsofts of the world will warn against open source products saying, well, yeah, the software is free, but you're still going to pay for an integrator. Well, you still are. You're going to pay for a Microsoft integrator, too. So either way, you're paying for integration costs. I can't say that for a total project, one or the other would be cheaper, but I know on an hourly basis, the commercial vendors, a lot of the CMS commercial vendors are $250 an hour, like a vignette or interwoven. So I think the customization costs could be a lot greater on the commercial side. For Microsoft, it might be another story. I mean, there are probably more affordable integrators for that. It's more widespread, but yeah.
The other cost thing I want to bring up is I've seen it many times in government organizations. They go to something like SharePoint, and then they not only are they paying for an integrator, they now have to educate all the users on how to use SharePoint. So they're paying, a consultant or a contractor to come in and give multiple training courses on how the users can use it. And in my own experience, we found that users, when we adopted plone, jumped on, using Kubu and workflow quite easily. We never had to hold a training class with anyone but myself.
Yeah.
I said, if you have a particular question, come visit me in my office. Got 20 people, and it was done.
Yeah, yeah, that's key. Yeah, I've had one or two clients that have organized, at the beginning of a project, assuming that they would need a big series of training sessions to roll things out, and eventually, by the end of the project, they've got a couple people that are comfortable just training people themselves, because it is Microsoft Word through a browser. I mean, that's the model. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead.
We put our intranet on plone. They perfect sense to roll intranet into it, which we did, and our departments loved it. But now that it's gotten out internally, the more techie people are saying, well, SharePoint is everywhere. It's got the hugest community. It's got a million add-ons. It's got a video doing everything. It's so much easier to make a wiki, to make anything. I got the riot act recipe earlier this week that our intranet is going to go to SharePoint. And I keep bringing up, what about audit trail? What about versioning? They don't listen to any of that. It's easier for somebody to take something in SharePoint. How am I going to fight that?
We had that big problem because we moved from SharePoint to plone, and we had a lot of people saying, hey, it's easier to make it here, easier to that. Part of that comes with how comfortable you are to modify plone, the base plone itself, the deployment, to make things easier. You listen to what exactly is the problem. Our biggest things people had issues with, IDs versus names, and then assigning permissions and stuff. So part of it was creating a really intuitive workflow and automated scripts, that people rename stuff, the ID goes with it. So half of it is how willing are you to customize it, and the other half is, I know it's hard, it's worse in corporate entities, it's easier, in my opinion, for government entities, to just kind of tell the users, look, you've got to suck it up. The advantages of, the security model and other things from plone are worth the fact that it's harder.
And you'd be surprised when you suck it up. Where Newport News, we wrote the EGUP file. We have in the panel at the end of this thing, and our directors, Amy Stein was, it's open source used for everything, and all of a sudden it's SharePoint's going everywhere.
Yeah,
Aggressive work.
You know-
A lot of money over there.
I guess the only place I've seen that war shake out is a large association, like a non-profit professional association that it really is more of a Java shop, but they were looking at SharePoint because somebody's on some board or whatever, involved in some other organization. That's what they use, and oh, it works smoothly, whatever. But when the users have a say, users that already use plone, that pretty much was the deciding factor. So if it's an organization where the users do have a say, then I would say involve them a little more. And
You have the techie guys rolling it out, and so I'd say by my director, what about these other departments that are happy with plone, they can make pay, well, we'll keep supporting them. What about everybody else taking them with SharePoint? It's just crazy.
yeah. Go ahead.
You mentioned that large organizations are using it, so can you discuss a little bit more about what's the size, how many users would be supported, efficiency and good performance, and related to the size of the organization?
Well, in terms of size of organization, I mean thousands of people. In terms of users of plone, more like dozens of people. As far as people who maintain different sections of the website, departmentally having control over their area of the website, it's really only in the dozens as far as the ones I've worked with. But if it was more of an intranet scenario, like with some of the non-government clients I've worked with that's used widely that way, and 3,000 to 5,000 users is about the most I've worked with. And that's obviously not logged in concurrently. There might be 20 people logged in at any time or something like that. I don't know. But as far as people who have logins and can access the system, and probably different people are doing that every day. But yeah, I don't think it's so much limited by the size of the organization as what you were getting to in terms of how many people are logging in and actively using the system. And I think at that point, then it's just a matter of scaling it. Zope does that out of the box. You can cluster across many instances of Zope, and we do have clients that are definitely deploying their sites that way, but more of a, very popular public sites that just get millions of hits, but they're dynamic sites, so they need to scale up that way. So I mean, the same would apply if it was more of an intranet where there's many, many users. So you would just scale up like you would any other application. If it was Java-based, you'd get another instance of WebSphere or JBoss or whatever going, and maybe get another server. Real similar.
How many users, like, can it handle massive amounts of users? Is that what you're trying to do?
I guess it depends on the access patterns. If many users are editing or it's just browsing the site.
All I can tell you is that I know that we're a poster child for massive, I'll say it just for the geeks. We have an average of 800 plone users. 300 are logged in and editing at any given time, and have about 60,000 visits a day.
Nice.
5 Zope instances round robining through 2 ZOs to support that.
I'm sorry, can you say what organization you're with?
Yeah, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, sub of the National Science Foundation. We have a lot of hits and everything. It is a major resource. I have to give you that. It's a pretty powerful server, but as far as Zope plone is completely capable of handling it, it's extremely amazing. The only downside, which I'm hoping to get around, is we do have an extremely massive data.fs file, 197 gigabytes.
Yeah.
And that's my fault for not splitting it up.
Wow, that is big.
Awesome. It's very good for small and it's very good for big. So I can't see a cap on like 10,000 users max. I just see adding more Zope instances, another ZO server, load balance.
And to address that, the data FS side, so with plone, the default storage is the ZODB, the Zope Object Database, and it's a single file. And even commercial tools like Documentum have gone with the object-oriented database approach. It's faster for content management. Maybe it's not faster for doing reports. So you can pump data out, like Kapil's presentation, to a relational database and do your crystal reports or whatever off of that. But some future release of plone, probably in the next year, and Alexander was saying this was their hang-up on the new plone.org, is they're incorporating the blob support that the newer version of Zope provides. And when plone has that, I think then it's even more capable. Right now, you're the only one that knows that there's this huge, big file, it's growing and growing. I mean, eventually, all the PDFs and Word files, whatever that people are using their intranet for to share documents, all those things will be stored on the file system, which is pointers from the database, so it'll be a lot lighter weight. But that's just that's an IT person thing to worry about. The users don't know or care.
And technically, Zope and Plone can handle right now. It's just the reason it's so large was an error on my part for setup. But it's
And things like that too. The versioning within Plone, you can also specify which content types you enable that on. So if you don't want there to be 20 versions of a big, 10 meg Word file, then you can say this content type we don't want a version. But if you really need that audit trail, okay, just get more disk space. It's cheap.
we were very impressed when we first started. So on Plone we had a user base of maybe 1,000 hits a day and 20 users editing. We were just running a single Zope instance with just without it IFS, and we started noticing it's getting slow, and that actually kind of worried us. Crap, we're not even a fraction of what we're planning, and it's running slow. So we started looking into the whole CO and multiple Zope instances, load balancing it. I'm telling you, it's extremely scalable. It's very nice.
And I guess there's the different performance needs if it's many users logged in and changing content versus many public visitors, millions of hits per month. And two different problems, but either way, you want to load balance and have ZO in front, or have a ZO cluster and have a load balancer in front. But it can scale.
Some of you guys have a ballpark number for, let's say you have a nonprofit organization and just has sort of a regular website where only one or two people might be editing at a time, and let's say they have some thousands of hits per month, let's say. With that kind of setup, the speed and latency wouldn't really be an issue at all, right?
So you can run that on a laptop.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Yep.
Yeah, the last point that I was correct you didn't have in there, which probably felt is the biggest reason for moving to Plone is, as a government agency, so many people want to access their secure data and their, account keys and stuff from home. And intranets, are hard because people have to have VPN on or have to be inside the network, and a lot of people hate that. So the wonderful thing about Plone is the workflow system. Once you log in, an entire new area assigned appears for you. People, when you search, log out for account keys, get nothing. Log in, you search for account keys or something, the entire list changes for you as people run it.
Is that as secure as a VPN?
Very much so. We, as a government agency, we actually have the Department of Defense audit Plone for us, and they came up with very few vulnerabilities for it, and those were.
We published that.
We haven't published it anywhere, but it's not hidden information. If you ask for it, I can give you information. If anyone wants my card, I have a card.
I think you better have brought a lot. Well, I think that's it. If you see me out in the hall and you want to follow up, feel free to let me know. All right, thanks a lot.